Hello, and in this video I want to talk about an aspect of this channel, namely the dark humor aspect of it, right? And I just want to make it clear that this channel is not about comedy or humor, okay? This is not a comedy channel, all right? Or a humor channel, all right? You might disagree with what I have to say, but I am very serious about what I have to say, okay? So, yeah. However, in this channel, I incorporate elements of dark humor, right? There are some videos which deliberately incorporate that element, and videos that incorporate dark humor into them will have a disclaimer in the description, okay? So the videos where there is a disclaimer in the description, talking about, dark humor, those videos deliberately incorporate elements of that, right? Now, I just want to make clear, though, that in metamodernism and post-metamodernism, humor is not comical, okay? Humor is not comical, all right? So keep that in mind, all right? Yeah, so the type of dark humor that I do here is not meant to make you laugh, really. If it makes you laugh, it's great, but that's not the main point. The main point of the humor, of the dark humor that I use in this channel, is to convey ideas or thoughts, okay? Or to reinforce the conveyance of an idea or a thought, right? So I just want to make that clear. Metamodern humor is not necessarily comical, okay? This channel is not about, this is not like a Rusell Brand type channel where, like Rusell Brand, discussed serious matter, but he incorporated comedy into it, in the sense that it made people laugh, right? Because he's a comedian, so he used his comedy skills to enhance the political message he was trying to communicate. Yeah, and just so that we're clear, I have read Rusell Brand's book. I've read his book. It is a very important book to me. I have a copy of it. I got it a few years back, and I've read it, a couple of times. This is a very important book to me. Rusell Brand Revolution, right? And I was very inspired by this book, and I've really taken to heart a lot of the things he has to say here. And I just want to quote a couple of things from it, and of course there'll be a link in the description where you can buy the book. Okay, but I just want to quote a couple of things from it. In chapter 8, called "I Am an Anarchista," right? He says, Gandhi, an extremely efficient revolutionary, is perhaps most admired for his excellent deployment of nonviolent protest. The ingenuity of nonviolence is not immediately obvious to us, the inheritors of a world built upon martial means, but the principle is almost like mathematics. Authorities are trained to deal with a particular kind of conflict, violent conflict. By using violent means, you are entering the territory that they are best qualified to control. Also, by becoming violent, you are turning into the frequency that you are trying to overcome, the frequency of violence FM. So yeah, I thought that quote was really interesting because, it's a very good argument against violence, trying to use violence, and then when I read this the first time, it made me think about urban guerrilla type, thing, the urban guerrilla approach where, a group of, revolutionaries get together and declare war on the state, and I mean, that has never worked in the West, in the Western Empire. That has never worked, has been tried and failed. The Weathermen tried it in the United States, Weathermen, where they tried to become, the American arm of the NLF or what have you, and they wanted to bring the war home and created like an American front for the war in Vietnam and what have you. And I mean, that never worked, and then you had Red Army faction in Germany. That also didn't work. They didn't do anything to overthrow the West German government, And I mean, their motivation was that they were fighting back because the West German government, with the help of the FBI, implemented a policy of counter-intel pro against the radical left in Germany, in the late 60s and early 70s. So, which they called the extra parliamentary left. So Red Army faction was formed as retaliation against the West German police, right? But I mean, their effort didn't really work. So, another example of failure with this, the urban guerrilla method or whatever is, armed proletarian cells in Italy. It's another failed, experiment with urban guerrilla. And in Latin America, Latin America is replete with stories of failure when it comes to, urban guerrilla. The Colombian FARC failed. The Colombian ELN went nowhere. Camilo Torres's project with the ELN went absolutely nowhere. The Puerto Rican FALN, they wanted independence from the United States. The FBI exterminated them. In Peru, MRTA, they staged that takeover of the Japanese embassy in the mid-90s. That's it. After they were simply, the Peruvian state just simply swatted them down. So many examples, of failed guerrillas. Che Guevara himself failed. When he tried to set up a revolutionary foco in Bolivia, it got him killed. Same as Camilo Torres, Camilo Torres joined the ELN, and he ended up getting killed. So both Camilo Torres and Che Guevara, who are the theorists of I don't know, guerrilla warfare or whatever in Latin America, they both got themselves killed, trying out their theories. So, and yeah, okay, the case is going to be made, well, Fidel Castro or whatever, the 26th July movement overthrew the Batista dictatorship. Look, the way it happened with the Cuban Revolution was this, okay? Yeah, it is true, the guerrillas did win the war in the countryside, okay? But you got to factor in that the Batista regime was, in a state of crisis. It was discredited. It was going through an economic and fiscal crisis. The Batista regime was not something that was really stable, okay? And despite support from the American mafia and the United States government, that regime was unstable. It didn't, and that's why it was easy for the revolutionaries to win the war in the countryside. Batista's army just fell apart, because they weren't loyal to him. They switched over or whatever, the rank and file soldiers, because, nobody was motivated to defend Batista, So, and then what happened was the Communist Party and the trade unions staged student demonstrations and strikes in the cities in Cuba. And then they paralyzed the economy and what have you. They paralyzed the government, with the strikes and mass demonstrations of students. And then the guerrillas delivered the final blow, and Batista fled, And then Fidel and the 26th July movement, whatever, Camilo Cienfuegos and Che Guevara, all these people entered Havana, But that was an exceptional circumstance in which you had a regime that it was, the Batista regime was hanging by a thread. That was very easy to overthrow, That's not the case everywhere else, And the other example that is thrown out, well, the Sandinistas in Nicaragua in 1979. I know the Sandinistas in Nicaragua in 1979 also overthrew, the Somoza dictatorship. They were successful, but it was the same model as the Cuban Revolution. Okay, what happened was, the Somoza dictatorship was hanging by a thread. It was discredited. It was not a regime that had any future. It relied on like, I don't know, state terror to maintain power, and at some point that doesn't work. Because the population was against it. Even it was not just the left was against it. The liberals too were against it. The people of Nicaragua were opposed to him. And it was very easy. What happened was the same as Cuba. Then when the workers' strikes and the mass demonstrations of Sandinista students had paralyzed the Somoza regime, then from the underground emerged, the cells of the FSLN, and stalked police and military targets and tackled the government down. Tackled down Somoza, and then Somoza fled. That's an exceptional set of circumstances too. Another thing that happened with Somoza is that the United States was busy with other problems elsewhere. The United States was dealing with, the Iranian Revolution and with other issues. You know what I mean? In Iran, and the Soviets were about to invade Afghanistan. You know what I mean? The United States was busy elsewhere, and Nicaragua wasn't exactly their priority. Saving Somoza was not their priority, even though the United States government maintained that Somoza is a bastard, but he's our bastard or whatever. It doesn't matter. They didn't really have the time or attention to help him. So that was also an exceptional circumstance that the United States was distracted with other problems in Central Asia. So those are the only two exceptions, and there were exceptional circumstances in Cuba and Nicaragua. Cuba 1959 and Nicaragua 1979. Those were very, very specific circumstances. Everywhere else that urban guerrilla has been tried, Western Europe and Latin America has miserably failed, and the United States too with the Weathermen, that failed. So basically, yeah. So Russell Brand is correct. Authorities are trained to deal with a particular kind of conflict, violent conflict. By using violent means, you are entering the territory that they are best qualified to control. I mean, if people were to launch, urban guerrilla warfare in Western Europe, in the European Union, now in any of these Western European countries, they would be swatted down immediately, because not only would they have, the security forces in the European Union are armed to the teeth. Sweden too. In Sweden they have all sorts of police. It's not just the regular police and the border police. They also have the security police, and I hear they have the clandestine police too. So you know what I mean. So the Swedish police is armed to the teeth, and they're trained to handle situations where there will be urban guerrilla. So it's a pointless thing to advocate. This idea. I heard this idea one time from an anarchist friend of mine, that maybe the undocumented persons or whatever should engage in guerrilla warfare, and form a guerrilla foco or whatever, or what have you, and use guerrilla tactics to fight back against the Swedish state. And I replied to him, if that happened, it would be suicidal. It would be the same situation as the Black Panthers in the United States. The FBI, totally destroyed them. After a while. They were able to create a resistance for a while, but eventually through COINTELPRO, the FBI was able to, eliminate them. The same way as they did in Puerto Rico with FALN, Fuerzas Armadas de Liberación Nacional, Pedro Albizu Campos or whatever. Those FBI was very easily, suppressed. The Puerto Rican guerrillas, and of course Weathermen. Weathermen was didn't last either. So yeah. So in the Western Empire, urban guerrilla is not going to work. So don't waste your time with that. All right. Russell Brand is correct about that. Yeah. But there is something else he quotes in chapter 14, which is get money out of politics. And I want to comment on something before I comment on the quote from Russell Brand. I want to comment on something. This issue of getting money out of politics. Just yesterday on Instagram, the Swedish Communist Party, Kommunistiska Partiet, started their election campaign, right? And and one of the memes that they put up there is that they want to cut the salaries of politicians, right? So I was like, yeah, right on. It's Kommunistiska Partiet. It's called the Swedish Communist. The bigger one, Kommunistiska Partiet, ran this little meme on Instagram that they want to cut the salaries of politicians. And when I saw that, I said, yeah, because when when workers in Sweden demand higher wages, the Social Democrat labor bureaucrats say no, because it would increase inflation. And the Social Democrat Party paid economists, the experts, right, paid by the Social Democrat Party, the Keynesian economists and what have you, the Social Democrat Party sponsors or what have you, they tell the workers no because it will increase inflation, right? So yeah, so I would say definitely cut the salary of politicians. a way to fight inflation might be just that, to, you know, cut the salaries of politicians, yeah, and decrease inflation, right? You will never hear, of course, a social democrat economists say that, right? Because, yeah, I mean, it's like the Trotskyists say, and I agree with the Trotskyists on this one, you know, the social democrats are agents of the class enemies of the workers' movement. You know, it's very correct. I mean, because social democrat labor bureaucrats and social democratic paid economists, Keynesian economists, tell the workers that if they demand higher wages, it will lead to inflation. I mean, they're supposed to be taking the workers' side, not work against them, you know, especially the social democrat labor bureaucrats. So, yeah, you know what I mean? They're supposed to be on the workers' side. If you represent the workers, if you represent the union, you're supposed to be on the side of the workers, not against them. And you're supposed to demand that their wages be indexed to inflation at the very least. But anyways, that's just a side comment. I want to go back to what a quote from Russell Brand in chapter 14 of the, you know, Revolution book, Russell Brand. Yep, thought so. He's called revered statesman. Thomas Jefferson, Tommy, referred to him as an enlightened cat and called his oratorical pronouncements riffs. I bet he wrote this with no shoes and socks on, wearing them little round John Lennon sunglasses. He continues with a Jefferson quote, "Every generation needs a revolution." He said that over 200 years ago, not one revolution in this nation since then. It's good to know that respectable, bewigged statesmen like Jefferson knew that to prevent an incremental drift towards hegemony and corruption, each generation would need to reassert a demand for fairness. One of the ways the current power structures are protected is through tradition. Quote, "You can't meddle with the Constitution, the economy, the monarchy. It's one of our proudest traditions," end quote. A tradition is just an old idea, only of value if it remains relevant. Okay? To remain relevant, it must resonate with timeless principles of unity and fairness. These institutions and statutes are riddled with language that fetishize unity and oneness, one nation under God, the monarch's duty to preserve peace. When it comes to crunch time, the only time that's real, the only maxim these ideas protect is elitist and hegemonic. And that's from Russell Brand, chapter 14. Chapter 14 is called Get Money Out of Politics. And it's a really good chapter from this book. Yeah, Russell Brand, you know. I mean, there's a lot in this book. There's so much in this book that is so useful and inspirational and whatever. You know, and again, I'm not, you know, in this channel, I'm not trying to be like, I'm not trying to copycat him or anything, because like I already explained, you know, this channel is metamodern and post-metamodern. And here, that's not what I'm doing. You know, this channel is metamodern and post-metamodern, and like I already explained, post-metamodern and metamodern humor is not comical, and that applies also to dark humor, okay? So post-metamodern and metamodern dark humor is not comical, so please keep that in mind. I am not a comedian. Maybe he's a comedian with a political, you know, edge or whatever. I'm not a comedian. I am actually an anti-comedian in many ways, because this is metamodern and post-metamodern, and in a way, post-metamodern humor, because it is not comical, is anti-comical, so it makes me an anti-comedian, perhaps. But I'll just leave it at that, and yeah, see you in the next video. Bye.